Let's turn this into this. And keep watching to find out my secret technique for giving this model some added realism. Hello and welcome to episode 7 of this video blog. My name is Gareth and this is my journey into Warlord Games Bolt Action. In this episode I will be finishing off a terrain project that will form the start of my Bolt Action game board. Those returning viewers will know that I am starting Bolt Action by putting together an early war French and early war German force and setting it around the Fall of France campaign. If you are new to this series, please do check out my previous videos to see how the project is coming along. Please do consider liking and subscribing to this channel, as it really does help push this project along. I have already partly assembled these MDF kits in episode 5, and the job today is to texture and paint them. The two kits are from a company called Sarissa Precision, based in Derbyshire, England. They make some of the best MDF buildings I have ever seen. The range they have on offer is very impressive, and they cover a huge span of historical periods. I really do recommend you checking them out, and I have copied a link to their website in the video description below. The building of terrain is one of the major reasons I wanted to start Bolt Action. I have a significant interest in Second World War history, but it was the chance to build real-world looking terrain that really drew me into this game. I have mostly built this set how it comes, but I've added a few matchsticks to the outside of the building to give it some further detail. I have also cut a piece of rectangular cardboard and stuck that to the outside of the building. I intend to use this as an advertising board that seems to be a common feature of 1940s buildings. Let's start on texturing. You can leave the MDF bare or just paint over it in a chosen colour. I've seen lots of people do this and it looks really good, but for this build I wanted to give the walls a very rustic rural cottage feel. To texture the walls, I used some cheap all-purpose filler. I applied the filler thickly to the outside of the walls, being careful not to cover any of the details around the windows and doors. Once I did this, I then stabbed the paintbrush into the filler, and this created a nice rough effect. After a few hours the filler had dried, and I sanded down any bits that had covered any of the details or smudged any of the edges. This was really a super cheap and very simple way to add texture to your MDF buildings. To prime the models, I used my standard grey colour primer. As I wanted the buildings to have a grey cottage look to them, going for a grey primer worked well. It took a few coats to get it all covered evenly, but when I was finished and it had dried, it was ready to paint. On to the painting. For paints, I used small tester pots that you can pick up in any hardware stores. Often you can pick these tester pots up for cheap, and they are a great way to get a different variety of shades that you will need. The outside of the building I painted in grey. I probably could have just left the undercoat spray and been done with it, but I wanted a slightly different shade, and painting over it meant that I could go over any of the bits that I had missed with the rattle can. Once I had finished painting, I gave the building a dark wash. For the roof, again I used one of the cheap blue tester pots. My first application of this was a bit too thick. I would suggest that less is more with these emulsion paints. To pick out the details of the texturing and to break up the block colour a bit, I did a heavy dry brush in a lighter grey. This really was a worthwhile step, and it started to bring the miniature to life. For the doors and windows, I whipped out my Citadel paints. I painted the door in brown and the windows in Death Guard green. It was difficult to pick a colour for the window shutters, but in the end I didn't want anything too bright, so went for this very subtle green. I knew as soon as I bought this set that I wanted to do something with the internal rooms. I will be using these two buildings as part of my Bolt Action gaming board, so I wanted to be able to have models enter the building and for it to look good on the inside as well as the outside. I could have just left the internal parts bare, but like the outside, I wanted to add a bit of extra texture and detail. For the flooring, I decided to use some cut down lollipop sticks. The lollipop sticks were very useful in getting the floorboard look that I was going for. They are very cheap to buy, and they were easy to cut into the shapes that I needed. Once all glued down and dried, I painted the lollipop sticks with a watered down Rhinoxide. I then gave it a wash with Agrax Earthshade. Finally, a rough dry brushing of Xandri dust to pick out all of the detail. I am happy with how the flooring has turned out. It took a while to cut down all of the lollipop sticks into the right shape, but I think it was worthwhile the additional effort. For the walls, I printed off 1940s style wallpaper patterns on regular printing paper. I was careful to only use generic patterns as it was difficult to get the scale right for 28mm. I know that you can buy proper doll's house wallpaper that is in scale, but these are usually very expensive and I didn't think it was worth it. I found sticking the wallpaper onto the walls to be very difficult. It would stick to my hands and the shape wouldn't be right, and fitting it over the windows was a challenge. I am not 100% happy with how they've turned out, but I know for next time to cut the wallpaper into smaller bits and fit it around the window, instead of covering the window and then trying to cut it out once it was already on the wall. This was a useful lesson for my future terrain projects. The wallpaper looked far too new to be a rural rustic farming cottage, so it was time to deploy my secret weathering method. It's time for tea bags. It may be surprising, but splashing some tea onto the wallpaper is a really effective way of staining them and making them appear aged. I made some small rips and marks, and by the end of it, I was happy with how it looked. Adding internal flooring and wall texture really does make this model come to life. I am really happy with how this has turned out. The kits themselves are amazing. They are lightweight and easy to store, and I would highly recommend Sarissa Precision. I've already planned of what I'm going to buy next from their website. At the time of the ending of this video, I have a few more things to do to finish these buildings, but I will post an update shortly. Once again, thank you for watching, and please do consider subscribing so that you don't miss any future episodes of this video blog. Thank you.